Hello, everyone. Today, I have to share the story of what I thought was the biggest betrayal of my life. The day I realized the request dropped from my husband, David, like a piece of ice into a warm drink, startling and suddenly chilling. We were hanging the final strand of twinkling white lights on our perfectly decorated Fraser fur, Bing Crosby humming softly from the speaker. So I took a call today. David said, his eyes anywhere but on me. It was Sarah. She's going to be in town for the holidays. I invited her to Christmas dinner. My hands froze mid-reach for a bulb. Sarah? The ex? The woman who had defined David's life and consequently my early relationship with him for the better part of a decade before I came along? She was the ghost in our marital attic, and David had just invited her to sit at our holiday table. I swallowed the immediate sting of betrayal and the instinctive urge to scream. "Of course," I replied, my voice sweet and even, perhaps a little too bright. "That's so thoughtful of you, honey. The more the merrier." David's visible relief at my easy acceptance only solidified the knot in my stomach. He was relieved I hadn't argued, which meant he had expected me to argue. He had known this was a violation of the unspoken sanctity of our first Christmas in our new home, yet he'd done it anyway. Why? The simple answer was vanity. David loved being admired, and no one admired him quite like Sarah, the one who got away, or rather the one he let go, a decision he periodically seemed to regret, especially when he felt I wasn't paying him enough attention. His invitation wasn't about holiday cheer, it was about showing off his life, his success, and most importantly, his beautiful, forgiving wife. He was setting a trap, hoping for a touch of Sarah's wistful regret to feed his ego. As I moved through the subsequent days, planning the elaborate menu, turkey with all the trimmings, my signature cranberry orange relish, and a flawless bûche de Noël, my smile never faltered. But beneath the surface, a cool, calculating strategy was forming. David had declared war on the peace of our home. I intended to finish it. I wasn't just going to tolerate Sarah, I was going to turn his ego trip into a public execution. I discreetly began my own research. It took a few calls and some minor internet stalking, but I found what I was looking for. Sarah was happily, demonstrably, blissfully engaged. Her fiancé's name was Julian. Julian was a corporate lawyer in Chicago, handsome in a rugged, outdoorsy way that David, with his sleek suits and city slicker style, could never replicate. I found Sarah's email and composed a short, elegant note. I didn't mention David's separate invitation. I kept it simple and purely social, expressing my excitement that she was in town and mentioning how much I'd heard about Julian. I'd simply adore meeting him. Since you'll be here for Christmas, why don't you both join us? The more the merrier. A few hours later, the reply pinged back. "Oh, Clara, that's incredibly sweet. We'd be delighted. Julian is thrilled to meet you." David and Sarah had made their play. Now I had made mine. The trap was set, but David and Sarah were the unwitting quarry. The feeling wasn't rage, it was a cold, pure focus. I knew exactly what David wanted from this dinner, and I was going to ensure he got the polar opposite. The Christmas countdown was no longer about gifts, it was about game theory. Christmas Day dawned bright and deceptively serene. The house smelled of roasting pine and spices. David, oblivious to the second, more crucial guest, was vibrating with nervous energy disguised as holiday cheer. He kept adjusting the settings on the dining table, practicing his casual conversation starters and checking his reflection. "You look beautiful, Clara," he said, giving me a quick, distracted kiss, his mind clearly already rehearsing his reunion with Sarah. I was wearing a deep crimson velvet dress and the diamond necklace he'd bought me on our anniversary, the same necklace I wore in the picture used to invite Julian. I looked like the perfect, devoted wife, radiating an unflappable calm that was entirely manufactured. "Thank you, dear," I murmured, pouring myself a glass of water. "It's going to be a perfect evening." The doorbell chimed precisely at 6. David rushed to open it, his tailored suit immaculate. Standing there, wrapped in a chic winter coat, was Sarah. She was as beautiful as I remembered, perhaps even more so, with a certain settled, peaceful air that hadn't been there years ago. David's face lit up, a genuine, unguarded smile that I rarely saw anymore. "Sarah! You made it!" he exclaimed, pulling her in for a hug that lasted a beat too long. "Clara, look who's here!" I glided into the foyer, my smile fixed and welcoming. "Sarah! It's wonderful to finally meet you! Happy Christmas! And you must be Julian." I extended my hand, not to Sarah, but to the tall, distinguished man standing slightly behind her. David's head snapped toward Julian, his smile dissolving into a look of utter catastrophic confusion. He hadn't seen Julian until I pointed him out. Sarah blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, but she recovered instantly. "Oh, Clara, you darling! I should have texted, but Julian and I decided to stick together. Didn't David mention? Julian's my fiancé." Julian stepped forward, his eyes warm, his hand firm in mine. "Julian Hayes. It's a pleasure to finally put a face to the name, Clara. Sarah says you throw the best parties." David was frozen, his mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The narrative he had meticulously planned, the charming widower greeting his gorgeous, single ex with a mixture of nostalgia and polite regret, had spontaneously combusted. Julian's mere presence was an undeniable physical declaration that Sarah was not, and would never be, available for David's ego games. I watched David's shoulders slump ever so slightly. He managed a strained, "Julian, right, pleasure," before awkwardly leading the group into the living room. Sarah, surprisingly, seemed genuinely delighted by my foresight. She clearly adored Julian and was happy to show him off, completely unaware that David had intended a solo, more intimate tete-a-tete. The evening was already mine, and the appetizers hadn't even been served. The real show, however, was yet to come. I poured them all champagne, the tiny bubbles sparkling, just like the cold satisfaction bubbling up inside me. The atmosphere at the dinner table was thick with unspoken tension, though Julian and Sarah did their best to maintain a cheerful holiday facade. Sarah and Julian were effortlessly charming, telling funny, intertwined stories of their life together, their plans for their upcoming wedding in Italy, and their complicated but ultimately loving families. Every word Sarah spoke, every easy touch of Julian's hand on her arm, was a small, sharp pinprick to David's ballooning pride. He attempted to interject with anecdotes about his own accomplishments, his latest promotion, his golf handicap, the prestige of the neighborhood, but they fell flat, sounding boastful and desperate next to the couple's genuine, shared happiness. Julian, sensing David's discomfort, tried to be polite, asking a few questions about David's work, but David's replies were short and increasingly petulant. This was exactly what I had hoped for. The presence of Julian didn't just neutralize Sarah, it framed David's entire performance as pathetic. He had invited her to make her feel regretful, but Julian's confident, successful presence made David look small, insecure, and ultimately interchangeable. Sarah didn't regret leaving David, she had upgraded. David, however, couldn't stop digging. Halfway through the main course, after a story about Sarah and Julian adopting a rescue dog, David cleared his throat a little too loudly. "It's funny," he began, leaning back in his chair, a smug look crossing his face. "Sarah and I used to talk about getting a dog, a Great Dane, I think. Before things changed." It was a clumsy, ill-advised attempt to establish a past intimacy and make Julian feel like an outsider. Julian's smile didn't drop, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at David, then at Sarah, then back at David, as if solving a particularly easy puzzle. Sarah, clearly annoyed by David's nostalgic jab, shot him a warning look. But it was Julian who delivered the fatal blow, entirely without malice, just simple, factual observation. "Ah, yes, Sarah told me all about that time. Right before she ended things, wasn't it?"
She said she realized that if her partner wasn't passionate about making a commitment, she couldn't waste any more time. That's actually why I knew I had to propose quickly, Julian said, squeezing Sarah's hand with sincere devotion. Couldn't risk losing her. The atmosphere shattered. David's face went white. Sarah looked mortified, but Julian's words were simply a loving validation of Sarah's strength, not an attack. David hadn't just been neutralized, he had been revealed. The story he had told himself for years, that he was the one who reluctantly let Sarah go, was publicly dismantled by the very woman he had hoped to impress. The truth, delivered by the man who successfully captured her heart, was that David was the one who had stalled, the one who had failed to commit, and the one who was left behind. I took a slow sip of wine, watching the entire, fragile edifice of David's vanity crumble right before my eyes.
David didn't say another word about the past. He barely spoke at all for the rest of the dinner. The bravado, the practiced charm, the air of confident entitlement, it was all gone, replaced by a sullen, wounded silence. Sarah, sensing the sudden toxicity, tried to steer the conversation back to light topics, but the damage was done. The easy conviviality was replaced by a strained formality. Julian, gracious and perceptive, quickly recognized the shift and, after the dessert was barely touched, stood up. "Clara, thank you. That was the most incredible meal. We really must be going. We have an early flight to see my family tomorrow morning." The farewell was swift and awkward. Sarah gave me a genuine hug and a look of confused gratitude that seemed to acknowledge the evening had been far more eventful than she'd anticipated. Julian shook David's hand, a moment of silent, accidental victory, and the door closed behind them. The silence that descended upon our living room was heavy, filled with the ghosts of David's shattered self-image. I began to clear the plates, my movements deliberate and slow, refusing to engage with the silence. David remained at the table, staring at the perfectly polished wood. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and brittle. "You did that on purpose." It wasn't a question. "Did what, David?" I asked, stacking the dessert plates. "Invited him. You knew. You invited him to undermine me." I turned to face him, my expression calm. "Undermine you? You invited a woman you knew you still held feelings for into our home on Christmas. You set a trap for your ex-girlfriend, hoping she'd show regret. I simply invited her fiancé. I neutralized the threat to my marriage. I ensured she couldn't sit there single and wistful for you to parade your success to. I ensured the conversation was about her beautiful future, not your shared past." I took a step closer. "If you feel ruined, David, it's not because of Julian. It's because Julian revealed the truth that you have successfully avoided for years. You are not the hero of that story. You were the one who couldn't commit, and now you have the proof sitting in your dining room." The realization, the total public and private dismantling of his carefully constructed reality, was the ruin. It wasn't the loss of Sarah, it was the loss of the idea of Sarah as his greatest conquest. David had been stripped of his most potent narrative. Over the next few weeks, our relationship crumbled. He couldn't look at me without seeing the woman who orchestrated his humiliation, and I couldn't look at him without seeing the man whose ego was so fragile he would sacrifice our holiday peace for a moment of validation. The house, once sparkling with Christmas joy, became cold and empty. The following spring, we filed for divorce. I got the house and the confidence that came from knowing I wouldn't spend my life being compared to a ghost. David was left with his wounded pride and the memory of the Christmas dinner that revealed him to the world and to himself as a failure. What did you think of that twist? Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever faced a betrayal like this? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of justice, and share this video with a friend. Until next time, stay strong.